Good evening and welcome to another screening of the graphic novel Picture Show. I'm your host, Civil Pandemic. And today, we're not looking at Birds of Prey, as we were meant to, because there was a little mix-up over at Amazon. And they sent me the 2004 Nicole Kidman movie, Birth. So, it's not exactly the same thing, is it? But regardless, the show must go on. Today we're going to discuss something that's been bothering me for quite some time. And a friend of mine actually asked me to bring it up in a video, so here we are. And here we go. It's no secret that I, formerly one of DC's greatest defenders, have fallen quite out of love with the comic juggernaut. Through a combination of their shitty movies, the way they treat gay characters, beloved characters, and women in general, their gimmicky sales strategy, and the absolutely unforgivable way they nickel and dime their readers to squeeze as much money out of them as possible. But we're not talking about that. Today, we're looking at a problem that permeates the entirety of DC's biggest titles. You see, at DC Comics, the word of the day is maturity. The powers that be over at DC, I think we all know which one specifically, are obsessed with being taken seriously as a storytelling medium. DC seems to think that the best way to go about achieving this goal is to make sure that everything in the main continuity is dark and joyless at all times with no levity ever. No one smiles, no one is ever happy, no one enjoys being a superhero. DC is afraid that if they tell a story that isn't gritty and depressing, that people won't take them seriously and think they're childish. They try so hard to be adult that it backfires and portrays them for what they really are. Children. DC Comics, the company that only makes books for 45-year-olds, is run by children. It could not be more obvious. Like a child who tells a joke and then repeats it over and over expecting the same reaction, DC Comics thinks that if people like the Dark Knight trilogy, then all they need to do to achieve total market domination is to make all their properties more like Batman. Green Arrow is Batman, Superman is Batman, Deadshot is Batman. And Batman? Give him 20 books and expect the fans to read each and every one of them. Shit, they even made Batman more Batman. In the old continuity, Batman had matured as a character, realizing that he couldn't just be sullen and misanthropic anymore, that he had all these kids who relied on him, and that he needed to grow up and become a better father figure for their sake, so that they don't grow up to be as angry and hateful as him. But it seems that DC's editor-in-chief doesn't understand the concept of irony, as they've since abandoned this concept, which showed actual maturity, in favor of the sex and violence approach. Everyone has to be young and attractive so that the kids can relate to them, and brutal because violence is cool, and everyone's marriage has to be undone so that the readers can live vicariously through the hero's sexual encounters with scantily clad female heroes. Oh, and side note, if you are buying comics specifically for the purpose of ogling women in skimpy outfits, seriously, that is beyond pathetic. Especially when there is porn, legitimate actual porn, available for free on the internet. This is not adult writing. This is a child's concept of maturity. It's the same wrong-headed policy that made comics suck in the 90s and made Marvel's books terrible in the early 2000s. The idea that in order to be effective heroes, the characters need to be miserable permeates every aspect of DC Comics to its highest level. Don't believe me? Here it is, straight from the horse's mouth. Here is DC Editor-in-Chief Dan DiDio explaining to fans why he vetoed Batwoman's wedding.
And when we went out with the New 52, and even before the New 52, we had one very clear idea in our minds with the Batman crew. They shouldn't have happy personal lives. They shouldn't. They put on a cape and a cowl for a reason. They're committed to being that person. They're committed to defending others. at the sacrifice of all their own personal instincts. And for me, that's a very important statement to make. And that's something that we reinforce, because if you look at every one of the characters in the Batman family, their personal lives kind of suck. Bruce Wayne, Dick Grayson, God rest his soul, but Tim Drake, Barbara Gordon, and Kathy Kane. It's wonderful that they try to establish personal lives, but it's also just as equally important that they put it aside because they know what they're accomplishing as the hero takes precedence over everything else. That is our mandate, that is our edict, that is our stand with our characters. We reinforce this with every single of the books, with every single one of the writers. You wonder what editors do? That's their job. I stand behind that 100%, I stand behind our choices 100%, and I stand behind Batwoman and Kathy Kane 100%. Name one other publisher that committed to a character of that fashion out there. Name one. There isn't.
Well, Danny boy, since you asked, Marvel, Archie Comics, Image Comics, Wildstorm, back when it was a subsidiary of Image Comics, the comic A Distant Soil, which started in the 80s, featured openly gay characters as the romantic leads, but the book jumped from publisher to publisher for years before finally settling at Image, where it has been since '96. It's true that The Authority, a comic published under the Wildstorm imprint after it was bought out by DC, featured Apollo and Midnighter, but let's be honest here. The only reason those two were allowed to exist was because they weren't directly linked to the DC brand, and it was still risky to have gay characters at that time. Not to dismiss the importance of Batwoman, but one must admit that DC didn't start doing gay characters in their main books until other companies had done it first, with little financial backlash. DiDio tries to take credit for the presence of LGBTQIA characters in comics, while at the same time implying that if we're not on board with everything they're doing, that we don't support gay rights. After all, they have a gay character, and if you don't support all their decisions about said character, it's because you're homophobic. Ipso facto. Again, he's like a child, blaming everyone else when his blocks fall over, refusing to accept that maybe he just didn't build a very good tower in the first place. But what can we honestly expect from the company that lied to a little kid to make themselves look better? Really, the bottom line is, if the characters are angsty and hateful all the time, why should I give a shit when something bad happens to them? They're already miserable, what else is it honestly gonna do to them? Stories need levity. If you want us to feel something when characters experience tragedy, we need to experience them at their best, so that we can see how it affects them. Otherwise, I'm just... oh hey, did something happen to that grumpy character? Well, he was an asshole anyway, he probably deserved it. An actual adult isn't obsessed with being serious all the time. They're not afraid to be silly. They are confident enough in themselves that they don't feel the need to prove how mature they are to anyone. If you're looking for books that won't insult your intelligence, Image has really turned things around since the days of Rob Liefeld. And Marvel is doing some interesting things. They're also bringing back Nightcrawler. But they're also bringing back Peter Parker. You take the bad with the good, I guess. I'm Sybil Pandemic, and sometimes comics are a drag.